Hi, I'm Lisa. I am co-founder of the SHARE project along with Michelle Rogers. And I thought I would start this particular interview by explaining what the word SHARE means in the SHARE project. It means spreading hope and awareness and removing the epidemic stigma. Part of this interview is spreading awareness. And today I have with me Captain Tony Cope from the Haywood County Sheriff's Department. He specifically is in charge of the drug task force, as well as some other things that we're gonna highlight on. But I'm gonna let him kind of take it away with telling us a little bit about himself, if you would, as well as how long you've been with the Haywood County Sheriff's Department, what got you into law enforcement in the first place. So, take it away.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised here in Haywood County, in the Lake Logan, Bethel area, and I started my public service career as a volunteer firefighter at Center Pigeon Fire Department when I was about 18 years old. Made my way up into the ranks of to the assistant chief position in that organization, and at that time, Sheriff Alexander was able to do a ride-along program for local volunteer firefighters. And I had a couple of guys that I went to high school with.
One thing we forgot to silence.
Yes, we did.
We silenced everything but that.
We'll silence it now. So you will get the edit. So we, when I started doing the ride-along program with a couple of guys I graduated high school with, the plant that I was working for shut down and provided severance packaging and training material, and they encouraged me to get into law enforcement, and I started in law enforcement September 6, 1999. I've been here about 21 years.
1999, okay, wow. So how long have you been doing the drug task force part of that then?
For about the last 4 years. Originally in 2007, I was in the drug unit, came out, done about 8 months with Cherokee Tribal Police, and then I came back in as a general crimes investigator, and then moved back over to the task force about 4 years ago.
Okay. So can I ask a couple of personal questions?
Sure.
Okay. Are you a family man?
I am. I'm married. Been married be 30 years in November.
Okay.
Have
Kids?
2 daughters, one 26 and one 22.
Okay.
And 2 grandkids, 5-year-old granddaughter and a 2-year-old grandson.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Okay. So being part of the drug task force, can you explain to me a little more what that means? Was there, you said a little bit of specific training there with
Yes.
and kind of maybe what that, little bit more detail on that, if you
Gotcha. Basically, my job is to oversee a 6-man uniform criminal suppression unit group that is attached to 3 plainclothes guys in the drug task force. So that I'm the 10th man in that group. Obviously, our job is very very covert at some level, and then also overt at other levels. So basically, these guys work undercover operations, they do surveillance operations, they also do just simple little traffic stops and generate activity that way. One of the things is our job is a fine line between enforcement and helping people, which kind of goes hand in hand sometimes. So basically, we are to enforce the law as best we can, and then obviously use our diversion programs and other things that's available to us to help those that are users. There's a difference between a user and a trafficker. Mm-hmm. Our users are those folks that typically use on a daily basis and may not necessarily sell or distribute drugs in any other way other than to purchase for themselves. And you have that distributor that capitalizes on that person and makes money at that operation.
Yes. Okay. Do the men that are under you, do they have special training themselves, or do you just kind of train them yourself?
We were very fortunate. We've been able to take a couple of the Drug Enforcement Administration classes through DEA. There's a 2-week basic drug school that helps us understand everything from managing informants to working undercover operations to surveillance to using technology and things to further our investigations. However, one of the things that it didn't do was teach us for what's coming now.
Okay, elaborate on that.
Basically, at that time, we were strictly enforcement, and not necessarily in the business of having partners like harm reduction, share, drugs in our niche programs to help that user. They typically got it through the jail or through the courts is how they got their education, prevention, their substance abuse training, counseling. So that didn't really teach us a whole lot of that in the beginning. However, we continue our training every year to help us be better and be a better community partner when it comes to overdoses and to assisting folks with overdoses and getting them the materials that they need, the information that they need, the help that they need if we can. And we try to do all those things and work with a lot of community partners now that we didn't maybe do 10 years ago.
Right. Would most of those community partners been in place 10 years ago, or are they fairly new?
Most of them were fairly new.
Okay.
Most of them were fairly new. I don't know that 10 years ago that we had anything like that, to be honest with you.
I was kind of thinking that same thing myself, knowing the different ones that I know about.
Sure,
so.
I don't know other than your typical Meridian and
Yes.
and those kind of things. I don't think there was anything else out there at that time.
Yes. Okay, so just going off script a little bit. Okay, would you say that the partners have come along because of the escalation in drug use, or just because of the escalation of awareness and to the prevalence of drug use and overdoses, or a little bit of both?
I think a little bit of both, and I think one of the biggest things that really brought this thing to light is obviously methamphetamine has always been the drug here for the most part, up until 4 or 5 years ago. And the next thing you know, heroin is here, fentanyl is here, and I don't know that people really knew how to deal with it at that time because we've never had to in the past. So as those things came along and we started seeing these overdoses and we started seeing awareness programs coming about, then obviously Sheriff Christopher's been the lead in a lot of that stuff and had that vision early on. So we're much further ahead than a lot of other places in prevention and education and those kind of things. So I think that seeing what was coming, seeing the trends that were coming and coming towards us, I think some folks had a good vision ahead and got these programs started and got some things moving a little faster. A little faster.
Yeah. Okay, so another part of your job, I hear from Sheriff Christopher, is that, and you hinted at this just a little bit, was that your linkage to care.
Right.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because to me, that's kind of that's one of our, in the share group, that's one of our passions.
Sure.
The linkage to care.
One of the things that came along is obviously the needle exchange program and things with Harm Reduction Coalition. And Harm Reduction, a couple, 3 years ago, we started what we call a post-overdose response type team. I went to some training for that, and one of the things that we learned, initially I was going out with those ladies to these houses and just kind of saying, hey, I'm here for law enforcement, I'm here from the perspective of we're here to provide you some help, and here's the ladies that can do that. I'm going to step aside and I'm going to let them talk. And I'll just kind of step out of the way.
Right.
And let them talk and give give them the option of services that they might have available to them. So, but then later on we learned that that's really not the best way to handle that because of law enforcement being present. Some folks might be intimidated by that. So now we share all that information with them and make sure that they're safe where they're going, and they go and respond to these folks, usually within 24 to 48 hours, if possible. And they provide them obviously details of places that they can go and seek out counseling for their addiction, mental health counseling. They provide them with Narcan and a lot of materials about drug addiction and those kind of things to try to get them through, maybe get them some help.
Okay, so I want to back up just a little bit. You said, do you approach them after they've had an arrest, after they've overdosed,
Right.
or committed a crime, or all three, or
Right.
I mean, do you,
Typically, it's after an overdose
okay,
for us to respond. And now that the death by distribution bill's out, we respond to all overdose deaths
Okay.
as an investigative tool as well to
Okay.
pursue that charge if it's able to do so. But we also have the peer support in the jail that is able to reach out to those folks as they come into the jail as well.
and the peer support comes from you guys, or does that come from a separate organization?
It comes through the Pathway Center. It's
Through
a
the
grant-
Pathway
a
Center,
grant
okay,
through the Pathway
okay.
Center.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's see. What are some of the other organizations that you're partnered with as far as that linkage to care goes? You mentioned a couple.
Yeah.
Of course, harm reduction being one of the first ones.
Yes, yes.
Let me just ask this question.
Okay.
What happens if harm reduction goes away?
Well, right now, we probably wouldn't have a post-overdose response group to go out and provide those services, honestly, if they went away, as far as that goes, because they're willing to respond. You know, we got the crisis intervention hotline as well that we can use.
Now, is that part of the Balsam Center?
That is.
Okay, now, how does that crisis center closure affect this?
Well, I think it affects it quite a bit,
Okay.
in my opinion, because, you know, you're obviously cutting services that's
And
very
that
much
was a
needed.
24-hour thing. That's,
Yes.
that my understanding is
Yes.
the 24-hour part
Yes.
of that is what closed.
Yes, as
Or
far as I
is
know,
closing.
or is closing, yeah, I think so. I think that would be a definite problem.
Okay, so then some of the others, pathways,
So you've got the peer support
Um,
through the pathways, you've got the harm reduction coalition, you've got the drugs in our midst program, which gets out in schools and provides education and those kind of things, and
Okay.
offers, you know, contacts for kids and things.
is that primarily for high school students?
That is, I think it runs from middle school through high school.
Okay,
And we got the DARE programs in our elementary school still, which is a huge prevention and education support to the kids that might not get that information.
yes. Have you seen, I don't know how much you know about what the DARE, I mean, generally
Right.
speaking, I know you know, but has that had to change through the years? And because drug use has become such a,
Right. I'm not sure how far along the DARE program has changed as far as that goes. Obviously, our SROs manage that and handle that in the schools. And so I'm not really sure how far the DARE program really goes as far as prevention and education.
okay, let's see. So in your experience going in to the different homes primarily, because that would be a first contact
Absolutely.
primarily,
Absolutely.
would you see, tell me some trends that you see. Would you say that primarily broken homes, primarily, do you see a trend from, low income?
Right. I don't think everything that I've seen in the past usually stems around mental health.
Okay.
And there's really no socioeconomic distinction between who has that problem.
That dual diagnosis.
That dual diagnosis
Yes.
doesn't matter. But mental health has been so far the trend that we can see that typically starts this downward spiral, if
Yes.
you will, to other drugs and to things that leads to a lot of things. One of the things that I didn't do early on in my career, I've done for the past 5 or 6 years, I've never asked anybody how long they've been on drugs.
Okay.
One of the things that I learned, and I've done just a little bit of study on my own from my own personal knowledge from managing the drug side of this thing, and I learned that most people have been doing drugs for more than 10 years on average.
Have been doing drugs.
Have been doing drugs for
drugs.
10 years on average.
Right.
So you're really behind. You're really behind in the game of
Yes.
helping folks. And 10 years of that, it's just like anything else that you do. You know, that's a way of life.
Yeah.
So it's
absolutely.
hard to get that under control sometimes.
Finding the underlying cause.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then addressing that
And
so you can get
Sure.
get help with the addictive part of it. So do you think the partners that you partner with then, do they push for some of that as well? Meridian, do they have then branches where they kind of try to help with some of that underlying cause, or is that a stumbling block?
Well, I think they do. I think they have the things in place. One of the things that I think is one of the huge problems is there's an overwhelming amount of those folks that need help, and sometimes you may not get the services that you need in a timely manner. No fault of theirs. It's just the nature of the situation that we're in. You know, if you got somebody there and you've responded out to a post overdose in the last 48 hours and you're willing to get help and you want them to get help, yet you tell them you got to wait 14 days before I can get you in a program. And by the way, do you have insurance?
Yes.
You know, that's a huge stumbling block for a lot of people because they don't have the ability to have that insurance to get them in this.
It is the biggest stumbling block
in the programs.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving parts to this thing that you know that could help if you had that. A lot of outpatient services have got 25 to 30 people in a group session.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I ask myself and ask my guys to do here is how do we measure our success? It's easy to say in general crimes of how you measure your success with property crimes, but you know, if you've got a program out there, how do you know what's working? How do you know that it's working? And I think you got to measure your success in some way. There's got to be some kind of a schematic there that says, hey, this is working 60% of the time.
Mm-hmm. What are your ideas on that?
Well, you know, the group setting, one of the things that you'll learn and you'll see as time goes on is long-term care.
Mm-hmm.
And what
recovery for life.
Yeah, what I mean is following this thing through from the time that someone's seeking help to case management outside 10 years from now, maybe. Just using that as an example. But I think you have to get a little bit of that one-on-one with folks, and sometimes we don't get that in some of these programs. I think you gotta maintain it, like you said, for life.
Yeah.
And follow up a little case management outside of the long-term facility. And what I mean by long-term is if you think in years of you've been doing drugs for 10 years, what is that long-term number? Is it a year in a confined program? Is it 2 years? It's all going to depend upon the person and how far they have been and how long they've been in this addiction.
Yeah.
But mental health is key.
Yeah.
I think mental health is the biggest part of that correction, and then obviously the addiction comes next.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to your point about the long term, I think the research kind of has come around to it. It's at least a year. I mean,
right.
The detox programs, that is just the tip.
Sure.
That is just getting them started,
Sure.
and then just to cast somebody out on their own after that 28 detox program.
Right.
It's just setting them up for failure, honestly.
It is.
I mean, and we've seen it over and over again.
Sure.
And then that, in turn, is the reason for not just overdoses, but overdose deaths.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and I think that the research
Yes.
definitely proves that.
Absolutely.
The science definitely proves that
It
for
does.
sure.
It does.
Okay, so just another couple questions.
Sure.
In this area, and not being derogatory, I'm just facts.
Mm-hmm.
In this area, what is one of the biggest things we are lacking when it comes to treatment and resources? I mean, we have harm reduction. We now have a recovery, transitional housing, one,
Right.
possibly two coming down the pike.
Right.
To my knowledge, we don't really have any long-term in-house treatment centers right here in Haywood County. We have some outpatient and intensive outpatient that are very good.
Sure.
So, in your opinion, what would you like to see? There be a little bit more of access-wise here.
I think a little bit more access to the long-term care and the long-term recovery effort. As I said earlier, you got all these folks that's got little bitty pots of money here and there along the way. If we can bring all that together and get us a good long-term care facility, and maybe have a 5 or 6, 10-step process, teaching people how to deal with their mental health, teach them how to deal with their addiction, move them into life skills that they may have had and or forgotten during this time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get down to housing and other things, all of those steps fall into play, and you move that thing through as an educational point. And when it comes to housing and some of those other things, it might not be near as hard for them.
Yes.
Because they've learned how to deal with their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
They've learned how to deal with their addiction. They've picked back up their life skills that they need to survive in the world, and then move them into some kind of housing and help them out, and then they're sustained and stable on their own.
Yes.
But I think long-term care would be the biggest thing that we need, especially in Western North Carolina.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and then you can add anything else that you want to add. And this is the question that I've been asking everybody so far, and this doesn't have to be something concrete
Right.
necessarily. If you could change one thing about the way substance use disorder, addiction, treatment, the way it's looked at, if you could change one thing, what would that be?
I think just one thing that I would change in helping someone is just the stigma of seeking that help. A lot of folks don't want to do that, and I've learned that just in some of the interview processes. Another thing that I would look at is also supporting that family of that person that may not understand addiction and may not understand the mental health side of this thing so much. So I think reducing the stigma for the folks that need the help, and also supporting those families that may not understand what's going on. It's easy for me to have a clear and concise path because I'm not involved in that, but it might not be for that person. So that person needs to reduce the stigma, and the family needs to understand addiction, and so they can help their family member or their daughter or son move forward in this thing. And obviously it's a challenge. It's probably one of the bigger challenge that's going on in the world today, is reducing that stigma, supporting that family, so that there can be some success.
I agree 100%, because that's in our name, the Share Project. but talking about it, what we're doing right here, talking about it more and more, and just being willing to share your story, being willing to talk more about it,
Sure.
starts to chip away at some of that
It
stigma.
does.
So,
It does.
and I think for me, when I first thought about stigma, and this is admitting to you
Sure.
my shortcomings, if you will, when I first thought about stigma with the passing of my son, I looked at it as stigma to me.
Wow.
And I know that other families
Sure.
got to think the same thing. They don't want to talk about their child that's struggling with addiction because it's a stigma to themselves. And one of the most eye-opening things, I think, to me in this process of starting the Share Project and talking with people is that there is so much stigma around the person struggling with substance use disorder and addiction.
Sure.
And that prevents them so much of the time from seeking help.
Yes.
And shame on us. Shame on us for keeping that stigma alive, because we're causing deaths because of it. There's so much more. It's just shame on us.
Right.
And I'm trying not to be part of that anymore.
Sure.
I'm willing to talk about it, but
Sure.
but not being willing to talk about it is adding to that stigma. So anything else that you would like to add? Did we miss anything you wanted to make sure we talked about?
I don't think so. I think we hit on all parts of that thing
Okay.
the best we can, and I appreciate you asking me to
Yes.
sit down and talk
Well,
with you.
I'm honored. I'm honored to sit and talk with you, and I appreciate your work and what you're doing, and the fact that you are educated about what you're doing means a lot. Because there's some that don't,
Sure.
not necessarily saying here,
Yeah.
but they just go about their job, knowing what their title is, and they're not necessarily educated on it, and it means a lot to know that there are some that have a passion for it as
Sure.
well, and really want to see
I don't think
some
there's
change.
I don't think there's very many families at some point, including my own, that's not been
Absolutely.
affected by it in some way.
Absolutely.
So there you go.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.